Morning. Elections, American election. Yeah. Well, it's time for fearologist, fear analysis to show up here. Political analysis kind of gets to you after a while. Existential analysis gets to you, and psychoanalysis gets to you. So why don't we try something new? Let's try fear analysis of what's going on in the world. And in particularly, this video will be a specific exercise for us all who are interested to deregulate, re-regulate, to correct, to recorrect, to come down from our conditioning of going through this election for the last 4 or 5 days in the US, red versus blue, black versus white, whatever the polarities might be in the polls and numbers that we're going to predict somehow or determine the outcome of a new age, a new politics, a new world, a new possibility. That's the excitement of an election, of course, for a president. And it's the excitement now looking like it's going to be a Democratic or blue presidential victory. That's yet to be decided, of course, and people are waiting with bated breath. My observation and interest this morning as a fear analysis is to offer you, I've been thinking about it this morning laying in bed, that wow, there's a really powerful conditioning and in the extreme hypnosis on a massive scale of anyone who is listening to or watching media on the whole election process, right? Weeks ahead, months ahead, throughout the whole campaign of a year plus, and now in this very intense time when our concentration, for many of us watching, myself included, my partner included, as she's an American and has voted herself, even though we live in Canada right now. And this concentration of attention is the primary key or core of how to condition a person, an animal, an organism, and then how to even hypnotize it into much more subtle messaging that goes with the high concentrated attention. Then messages can be put in, and our brain circuitry works that way, especially when the attention that's being brought to the subject or the conditions, the situation, the environment. This is evolutionarily evolved mechanism. Concentration is for alertness to then do what we need to do to survive and not be harmed, etc., etc. So it's a fear response, part of our defense intelligence that's being utilized through concentration, and then what then gets inputted with concentration can be manipulated. Absolutely, by all kinds of intentions, conscious or unconscious. And it's certainly in an election of a presidential campaign that's so contested as this one, although most of them are. But this is a very important one, as many people have said, perhaps historically important, of going down a very painful, suffering, difficult direction, perhaps, and can we correct going down that direction to a very destructive world. So Education for a New Age was just my initiation into, here we are going to do today learning. We're going to do an education process. We're going to do a dehypnosis, a deconditioning. So stick with me. This is not a harmful exercise. I think you'll agree with me by the end. And of course, at any time you can shut it off and decide to come back later, or just delete and put it on file. And if you find this a useful exercise of deconditioning the hypnosis during this election time, please send the video out, of course, to everybody you think would benefit. At the end of the video, I will then, after this exercise, do some suggestions I'll offer some very simple suggestions for how families, homes with couples or not, even individuals, but also schools. There's so many children that are caught up in this adult election, and that is their future that is on the line. And education for a new age really is relevant to all of our generations to come. I'm an educator. I'm a fearologist. I do fear analysis. Welcome to this show. Okay. I'm going to start with a little exercise. Just take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes if you want or not. Just let your shoulders relax. Notice your breath again. Feet flat on the floor. Get yourself comfortable. We're just going to do a simple deconditioning and a dehypnosis of all the imagery that has captured our attention. TV screens, computer screens, in the media of all kinds, radio programs, interviews. A lot of shouting is what I can hear right now. Maybe you can hear a lot of shouting on both sides. The blue versus the red, Republicans, Democrats, blacks, whites, whatever the polarities might be. Just let that shouting disappear, fade off. If it stays intense, you could just put it in a little package, wrap it up in your imagination. And just send it off, put it in a place that you'll come back to later. Not trying to repress it, not trying to dissociate from it. Just putting it in its place. You're the director of the show. So I'm directing you to direct yourself right now in this exercise of deconditioning. So now look at the map in front of you of the United States of America. The map that has been put on media station after media station, show after show for so long of red states and blue states. So there they are. Just have a look at them. You've all seen this image more or less. Which ones are Republican, red? Which ones are Democrat, blue? Which ones are undecided, might be in another color, but it's pretty much always a map of red and blue states. Very common rhetoric, very common way of representing reality. But this is not reality. This is a representation. But because we've seen it so often and repeated, and we'll continue to see it today, in this in-between state, when they're trying to make a decision on the final counts, who is the president of the United States, you're going to see and keep hearing the same repetition of these red versus blue, blue versus red, and that there always has to be a winner and a loser. This is not an education for a new age. That is an education for an old age. So we're going to dissolve that now in this quick, short exercise. Take another deep breath. Just relax your shoulders. Feet on the floor. Just loosen up your toes a bit. Wiggle them. Same with your hands. And realize that you're the director of the show now. Nobody else is controlling your show, how you're going to represent the world, how you're going to represent America, how you're going to represent the possibilities for a new future for this country, or could be any country in political strife. Let's just dissolve now and What we're going to do is we're going to use nature first. That red and blue map of all those states, see them now in front of you. Let's use nature now to just imagine natural vegetation, mountains, forests, rivers, creeks, and wiping that entire map of blue and red states slowly off. You can go from east to west if you want, or west to east, or north to south, whatever you want. Just erasing with this magical eraser in your hand. And as you erase the red and blue states, all you see now is nature. A map of forests, rivers, creeks, parks, lakes. Go across the entire country doing this. Revealing nature, the earth, the real. Take a breath as you get to the end of cleaning that off. And the next thing we want to erase, dissolve, is words. So over the last months, as I say, even year plus, and definitely this last 4 days, of words that everybody is pushing down into your brain because they've got your concentrated attention. All those words can be deeply conditioning and make you believe certain things because it comes from an authority on the media or some lecture or even the presidents or even the candidates for presidents, anybody who's using words to try and convince you. So let's just wipe all the words, take another brush going across America. And we're going to just go, keep our nature image there, but we're going to wipe out all the words that have come from people. And all you're going to hear is the sounds of nature as you wipe out the words. So you can even see or remember some of those words, hear them. You can hear the shouting, perhaps. It comes with all the emotion. And you're just going to use this brush again to just wipe across America and just suck up all those words into the brush. And all that's left are the noises of nature. You can hear those as an alternative. Okay, I'm just going to turn my heater off, making a lot of noise. There we go. And then let's just enjoy the silence. All those words, all that noise, wiped away, soaked up in this brush. So we've looked after nature, we've restored her. We've looked after the words that often aren't used carefully, and we've restored so that our words now can be more careful. I'll talk about that later in this video. We've looked after authority. We've reclaimed our own authority. And the last part of this exercise of dehypnosis is to reclaim fear. So now I just want you to look at the map again. And I want you to feel, not just see, not just hear, but actually feel the vibration of America in the last year, months, this last 4 days, the amount of anxiety, fear, tension. And we're letting it be there, we're letting it be real, but it's not everything. And so with your brush, I want you to bring fearlessness, however you define that term. Fearlessness. It's a quality. It's an experience. It's an idea. It has power. And it's now a brush of fearlessness. Just take that across the entire map. Once again, vacuuming up all that fear and anxiety. All the way across. If there's some hot spots of particular fear and terror, just really let the brush stay there for a few seconds. A little extra. Suck it all up. All right, finish up all this cleaning, deconditioning, dehypnosing. Now you can just take that brush and put it wherever you want to put it and what it all holds and how it's such a powerful tool for you. Save it somewhere. Keep it handy. Because we know all of those things that we've talked about today are going to come back, especially as you watch media, listen to media, listen to your neighbors, whatever it might be. It's part of the world, but it's not the only part of the world. So you've learned fear, you've learned to be fear conditioned, learned to be hypnotized through fear as an attention grabbing process. Elections can really do that for people because they're afraid of who's going to win, who's going to lose. They're afraid of losing their identity. But all of that, now you have another tool. You have fearlessness. Okay, you can open your eyes and come back. And so that's basically one of the methods I've used of fear analysis to analyze a situation, any situation, on a mass scale, or it can be in a very individual scale within your own mind, your own body, mind system, your own environment, your micro environment, or the macro environment of the world even, of how fear plays such an important role with concentration, getting your attention, and then using authority, words, and a reduction of nature in the worst sense, which can happen when this artificial, right, mapping or reality is imposed on reality. And so we're supposed to just think of America as blue versus red states. And somehow that's going to help us, manage the world. Well, it's not. It's extremely an illusion, and it's created. And yes, it has some partial truths that we have to deal with, but it's not who we are. It's not what we are, and it's not what America is. And it's not what the earth is and the ecological systems are. So I think you get the picture. We're doing fear analysis to recover a holistic, integral, healthy worldview again from that one that wants to dominate. Yeah, some people call that, as my colleague Four Arrows calls it, an indigenous worldview. We just took an indigenous worldview and dehypnotized from our dominant worldview. I'll put a link to Four Arrows' work there, and I've written a book on his work and his life as an educator with an indigenous perspective, which I call a fearlessness perspective, and he totally agrees. All right, so I said I was going to do a few other things to end off this video with recommendations. So you as a family, you as a school teacher, in any kind of setting, you can do this in the workplace. Come Monday morning, maybe that's your commitment to yourself. If not sooner, you could do this in a church community or a synagogue or whatever it might be, a religious institution. What you can do is do a little research and find out, as if, let's just say these are blue cards and red cards, and blue representing democratic values, principles. So you pick out all the best principles from the democratic side and its history. Do a little research, you can do this. Even if you know just off the top of your heads, what are some of the things that are probably really good about the democratic worldview? And then same with the red, the Republican. What are some of the principles, right? So some of the values, some of the ways that are probably the best and really work. Everything has some partial truth. So that's education for a new age. It's called an integral age. It's called an integral or integrative politics. Marianne Williamson, as she ran in the campaign for 2020 for president, did not make it very far, but she did a good job on convincing people, at least a lot of people, that there is another third way to do politics other than this polarity of everything's bad on this side or everything's bad on that side, and we got to go all red or we got to have all blue win and so on. And she said, there are high principles of blue, Democratic, there are high principles of red, Republican. And she was running as a Democrat, speaking that language. There's partial good in everything. There's a high set of values in both sides. So here's the exercise. You just write some of those out on cards, blue cards, red cards if you want to color them. Let your children color them. And they get to learn, so what's really good about the blue? What's really good about the red? Because children and all us adults, we've been watching that red-blue map, right? So we're just deconditioning to not see them as only against each other and who's going to win, who's going to dominate. Get it? Yeah. So that's a pedagogical exercise that will help liberate us from our conditioning and our hypnosis. And is educative in that there's lots to learn from both sides. So this is a good time to do that, because that's not what media is teaching you. No matter who the media is, red or blue based media outlets. All right, and the last exercise I just want to do is a spontaneous exercise. I received this book just the same day yesterday that the election was reaching its peak of unknowns, and would we know a decision of who is going to be president or not, which party is going to win, and so on. There's great tension going on, and people, in the streets on one side and pro-Biden, streets on the other side, pro-Trump, and as you know, lots of drama and lots of energy going on. And all of it, as far as I'm concerned, is primarily fear-based. That's not to blame anybody for that condition. It's just that that's how the education in the old age, in the traditional ways, has raised us to think within those kinds of categories. Polarization, sometimes called binaries or opposites. And although those are partially true, and these polarities have realities, they are not the reality. So education in a new age, and I'll mention a little bit more about this book in a second, but I actually want to do the activity first, and then I'll tell you the background for why I purchased this book. And I was just interested synchronistically, right? Sort of, is it by accident that it just showed up in the middle of this election? I've been waiting for it for a long time. And there it is. It shows up in the middle of this intense time. And I start reading it and I start thinking, I want to share some of this on a video. Not because I think this book's the answer to everything, but it's because I'm an educator as well. I always am looking at different views of education for the future. Our new generations, our world, our ecological systems depend on it. We have to revise. We have to revise from that dominant worldview that conditions us, hypnotizes us, to a much more indigenous-based or ecological-based, whatever you want to call it, healthy, fearlessness worldview. And that's why I brought in the brush of fearlessness as the fearlessness paradigm that can start to wipe away some of that fear-based paradigm that's always going to be there for a long time in the part of the old age still living in us and controlling much of how we operate and think. So now it's a thinking exercise. You've heard me talking about thinking differently, deconditioning our thinking, and we can recondition it and create our thinking the way we want to do it. As empowered children can do this, and as adults and even post-adults beyond what we recognize as normally adult behavior. Yeah, there's a spectrum of possibilities even beyond being just an adult to being what I might call a mature person. So the exercise comes from a real piece of research I did and published on this, but regardless of that, I created 531 cards, each with a name on them, of a particular kind of thinking. Materialist thinking, philosophical thinking, on and on. 531 I could come up with just kind of sitting down and writing these out. I'm kind of a maniac that way, and then put them each on a card. And then I thought, well, it'd be really interesting if you kind of gave this deck of cards. This is about 100, so I have like 530 of these different kinds of thinking that are possible, and I'm not judging them, good, bad, or anything. See, I'm not polarizing them. Just said, well, let's get a lot of diversity of types of thinking, and let's get a vocabulary so we can put words on those thinking, and then we can actually research them and see, well, what does that actually mean? What does materialist thinking really mean? What does mathematical thinking really mean? And so on. You can see these are in alphabetical order. This bit of a group I just grabbed. So you could then give these to students in schools. You could give them to yourself, and you could draw in and say, well, I just want to kind of think about a different way of thinking today, or learn about another type of thinking today. That's actually curriculum. Oh yeah, you think schools might want to do that. You think education in formal and informal settings from children to adults, even in our highest institutions, you actually might want to think about thinking about different types of thinking. Yeah, that's called meta thinking. Thinking about different kinds of thinking and how to organize and make sense of those and actually utilize them. So there's one. Phobosic thinking. Weird, eh? Phobos meaning fear. Fear-based thinking. Phobosic thinking. Anyway, I'm not going to be going through these, but here's the exercise we'll do to end the video. Random. We're working class thinking. Just means people in poverty who are working poor, as sometimes named. I come from that particular background myself, interestingly enough. That was just the way I was born. That's where I was raised. And I know it affects my thinking deeply in many different ways. But I could learn more about it. So it'd be interesting for everybody to learn more about what is working poor or poor working thinking for people who are in poverty chronically and cannot get out. So then I take this card, and I'm going to tell you just briefly about this book. So I'm still working with this. This book is written by Alice Bailey, and Alice Bailey is an esotericist, and that's a long history. You can look her up if you want. And I'm going to she wrote this book in the 40s, probably, before she died in 1949 in America, and the book was published in 57 loses trust. And education is, or should be, a continuous process from birth to death, concerned not so much with the acquisition of knowledge as with the expansion of consciousness. Knowledge of itself is a dead end, unless it is brought into functioning relationship with environment, social responsibilities, historical trends, human and world conditions, and above all, with the evolution of consciousness, which brings the infinite vastness of an unknown universe within the range of the finitude human mind through thinking. I added that last part, through thinking. So how can we educate our thinking is part of what she was writing about in this book. So now I'm just gonna just drop that in on a particular page just to see what I did. And just read spontaneously for a little paragraph or so. Alice Bailey, and she is channeling the Tibetan, which was an ancient spirit that she was guided by for many years. We have in the world a general theory as to education, and certain basic methods are universally employed. Countries vary greatly in the application of methods, and systems differ very considerably. All, however, teach these same fundamental things. They teach the youth of the country to read and write and to attain a fair measure of ability to deal with figures through instruction in elementary arithmetic. These three are curious symbolic of the whole evolutionary unfoldment of the race. Reading has to do with clothing of ideas with form, and is related to the first step in the creative process, wherein deity, governed and impelled by an idea, embodying God's purpose and plan, converted that idea into the desired substance and clothed it with the needed outer appearance. Writing symbolizes the method whereby the process is carried on, but it is, of course, far more personal in its implications. Reading is concerned essentially with the realization of a clothed idea of some kind, whereas writing is, curiously enough, concerned with the individual's conscious self-relation to ideas, and his or her use of words in writing is the measure of the grasp he or she may have of the universal ideas. So reading, writing, arithmetic, the three basic R's, she was already starting to sort those out into a new kind of thinking, not just the typical materialistic way of understanding them, but a spiritual way of understanding them. And in the end, she's very interested in this new education for a new age that works with universal ideas. I have no doubt in my mind that it's going to be universal ideas, not red versus blue ideas. For example, black versus white ideas, for example, Christian versus non-Christian ideas, and so on. These polarity, these are not necessarily going to get us to the universals, because we're going to pay attention too much to the surfaces of differences. Although we have to pay attention to them. Education for a new age is looking at that, always the integrative, universal, what are the best parts of both polarities, for example, and how can they be complementary. That's one of the principles of the ancient teachings, the wisdom teachings that I've studied and many others have studied. The indigenous peoples have known complementarity of opposites is really important. So in our deconditioning, our dehypnosis process, what we just did with America in that image exercise was to get back to the universal realities, right? Underneath the marking out of all the territories, naming them, putting borders on them and defending borders, and all that legal coding and divisiveness. How do you have a United States of America? How do you have a United Nations organization that brings and helps bring about quote, a diverse and interesting and unique, to keep that, but keep the universal. So that's why united, that's why United States, that's why Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is where we're going for an education in the new future. And hopefully that'll be a near future, not just a new future. And then I'll end on another thing you can do in your home, or just as you're exploring the blue and the red and the best of both of those sides of the political spectrum, is an interesting book that came out many years ago. It was given to me, and it's the Little Blue Book, and its subtitle is, The Essential Guide to Thinking and Talking Democratic. Because this is the argument that I'm bringing forth. There is a universal value to the democratic process. It is not perfect. It is not the only solution to offer, and it is not the only alternative. But it's a pretty good one in all likelihood. So we still have to learn about it and mature it, what democratic means. And that's a lot of the subtext for my lesson today on this video. The Little Blue Book was created by, fairly left-wing type thinkers on the Democratic side, who basically, George Lakoff, quite famous researcher on social linguistics and communications, and he basically said, is that if we're going to go anywhere, we have to figure out the best values of the Republican side and the Democratic side, for example, and the Democrat Party. And we have to be able to use some kind of language, right? Words, as we talked about earlier, are so powerful. Language, imagery, stories, words that the blue can talk to the red. And if there's a book out there, I don't know if there is, the Little Red Book, it would have the same agenda of how can the red Republicans talk to the Democrats so that they'll listen. So that was George Lakoff's idea. And this is a good little guidebook if you want to get out there and look. And of course, what he says, George Lakoff and other researchers, is so much of the commercialization, the corporatization, the media spin and invested interests based on fear, is what I would add. Those tend to want to dominate and control, if not destroy, the opposite. And so that's why we get such a politics of contention and conflict. Not that conflict's bad, it's just that it's not being managed very well, and fear is not being managed very well. And it's being used as tools to oppress the other side and try to have vested interests to win one side or the other. Okay, so that was my political lesson. That was the conditioning, deconditioning exercise and dehypnosis. And let me know and write below in the links here if you watch this video again. I'd suggest perhaps going through the exercises more than once if you want. But give me some feedback on how that was for you today. Thanks, and let's see where the world goes the next day and the next. And you're part of that. You can create your world too, as well as the world creating you. Okay, over and out.